Hello and welcome to Pods Like Us. I'm Martin, well known to my friends as Marv, and this time I'm speaking with Jason from It's Not That Bad. Hey Jason, thanks for speaking today.
Martin, thank you so much for having me on, and thanks for squeezing me into the schedule when you could.
That's fine. I've enjoyed the quick deep dive into all things. Well, I'm not really going to call them bad films because they're not all that bad.
I guess it depends on what your definition of bad is. It's because there are some films where we watch and go, yeah, this is bad, but our whole basis is that the critics are going to say one thing, and critics are notoriously harsh, if you will. It's almost like they take pleasure in finding the most eloquent way of calling a movie crap, and that's not necessarily indicative of the actual movie that they're seeing.
Well, I've seen films where people have said that about them, and then I've watched them and I've thought, I enjoyed this in the film, I've enjoyed that in the film, and it's usually the lesser known or the lesser liked, should we say, comic book related films where I'll find something I'll think, do you know what? I enjoyed that. And I probably enjoyed it a bit more than the glitz and the glamour of the, shall we say, more well-known superhero stuff.
Well, I mean, a lot of it depends on the property, and more often than not, we consider what we like to call the weight of expectation. When you think about the first three phases of Marvel films, if we're talking comic book films, everything was really so good, except for like one or two. I could pass Thor: The Dark World any day. That's the only Marvel film I think I've fallen asleep to more often than I've watched the whole thing. But, there was it was the newness to the concept. And I think DCEU got a lot of flack for trying to mimic the Marvel method, if you will, by, jumping right into, all right, then we're going to do Justice League and then Justice League Part 2 and Darkseid right away. It's like, no. Let's build it up a little bit. Let's build up these characters, which is why I think, a movie like the first Wonder Woman film and the first Aquaman film got better receptions, and then it started to go downhill from there. There is a weight of expectation. But if you're going to take a look at a film like Eternals, and you're going to try and compare it to Infinity War, don't. They are two separate films, and if you allow yourself to take away the weight of expectation that you get coming out of something like Endgame and Infinity War, then you can enjoy the film a bit more. And then also take into the sensibilities. You go into a Chloe Zhao film, you're going to get a beautifully shot, well-acted film, but maybe not the pacing of something like the Russo brothers and something that they would direct. There's, I think, part of the problem, too, when you get franchises like that. You have different directors throughout, and you're going to have different feels for different films. I think that's what Marvel did well in the first part, is that, the Ant-Man films, they were heist films.
Yep.
Captain America Winter Soldier and Civil War were more thrillers with a lot of action in them.
Bit of espionage.
Exactly. You could sit there and say, no, it's a genre film, just happens to be in this universe. And that's kind of what the comic books were to begin with. But I think that's why some of the smaller, lesser known properties are well received, because they're new. They're fresh.
I'm waiting for them to do some of the westerns that they used to do back in the day at Marvel, and possibly some of the old war comics as well that they used to do. Because I mean, if you go back far enough, we're supposed to be talking about films here, but you've pulled me in now, and I'm a comic book nerd. So
sorry, not sorry.
Sorry, not sorry. And so if you go back far enough in the history of Marvel comics, Timely Comics, or whatever, you go far back enough, and the same with DC. You go back far enough, there was a variation there, huge variation. So you'd find that, like I said, you've got westerns, you've got war, like war stories where you've got actual armies, and these weren't related to, for the most part, weren't related to that superhero type of thing, because you also had romantics as well. But so there's a whole wealth of material there, but they just seem to be working on that. And quite frankly, I think you're right. DC were trying to come out of the gate too quickly. And like a lot of people have argued, their better way would have been, in a sense, to have just forgotten the connectivity to start with and pick up what Marvel's missing, essentially, by taking advantage of the wealth of what is out there for them to work with, as opposed to going, right, you've got this superhero, this one, this superhero. We've got to have all of these superheroes in a film, each individually, because film 5, we've got to have all of them together and having a big battle. And that was like pushing it a bit too much.
I think, though, you could take a look at the MCU, the Iron Man and on, and that, I think, in itself was a reaction to what they had done in the earlier 2000s, where you had Daredevil and Elektra and Punisher and Ghost Rider and any other movies. There is actually a Man-Thing film that was only released in Australia and only on DVD here, where they had these separate characters in their own little world, and they never crossed. But that was also one of the cool things about comic books, is that occasionally you would have Spider-Man pop into a Daredevil comic book. I mean, even when Marvel had the Transformers, you would see, I think it was like the third or whatever episode or issue of the comic book, there's Spider-Man on the front cover, slinging up Megatron. It's like, you could have that possibility. Part of the thing, though, is that I don't see a way that they could take a comic book like Sergeant Rock and bring that to the movies now. And some of those properties they don't have anymore. I remember I was a huge fan of Rom the Space Knight. It was a short run that Marvel had, and then they lost the property of Rom, and that eventually went to IDW with some of the other Hasbro properties. Marvel's got that character back now, and they're about to, in January of 24, release a volume 1 of a giant omnibus of all the Rom comic books from the Marvel line. I just don't see how you can roll some of those non-Avenger type characters into this world, although they are starting to branch out a little bit. Obviously, something like Werewolf by Night, it's not directly related to the Avengers, and it was great. It was fun for exactly what it was, and I think that's where you can kind of have the middle ground. How they did the Marvel special presentation, right, where you can take a property that you have that in no way possible can tie into the MCU, and yet still do a property for Disney Plus and call it a Marvel special presentation.
Yep. I mean, you've mentioned that, and that makes me think of, that's where I think it works for them with the Disney Plus option, like you said, with the specials, because I enjoyed that. And I even enjoyed the Guardians of the Galaxy Christmas special as well, for what it was. I thought that was really good. Whereas the series, they're a bit off and on. They sort of have good, ups and then downs and pits, and it's almost like, because they had the restriction with those specials of, you've got to write it and it's got to be within this specific time frame. Sometimes I think you can actually get good quality that's consistent throughout if you've sometimes got that restriction there. Whereas if you say to people, oh, no restrictions, you can write what you like, and you've got a choice between 6 to 9 episodes for the series, it's up to you. And it almost gives them too much free will, and you get highs and lows then throughout a series.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because, here in Canada, we of course have our own shows that we watch, and we get a lot of American television. And the traditional series length for a show is 22 to 24 episodes of anything that's on like major American networks. Whereas I've always been of the mindset that the Brits have it right. Shorter seasons, more compact stories, and less filler episodes. I think, people are hating on Secret Invasion, and I don't get it, because I thought it was, through the 6 episodes, it was very well paced. I think with WandaVision, I think it was very well paced. Loki was phenomenal, which I think Loki is still, to me, the best series that they've done so far. But with She-Hulk, it was one of the longer series, but I felt you could have taken out 1 or 2 episodes and streamlined it a little bit. And that may have hurt the Netflix series when they had Daredevil and Jessica Jones, which freaking love Jessica Jones. I thought that was the best. Yep. Aside from Daredevil, I think Jessica Jones, especially season 1, was the best Marvel Netflix series. But Luke Cage and Iron Fist just felt too long. Like they were trying to shoehorn it to 12 episodes when sometimes 6 is a perfect amount.
Yep, absolutely. Anyway, we've already gone off topic. So we'll go back on topic now, and we'll say, what do you think is, I've put the wonder of questionable films, like we said before we started recording, what would you call a questionable film? I think I've sort of already mentioned in a way that, going with what you said, it's the degree of expectation in some ways and the hype that you've got leading up to films where, when you were talking about on the recent episode with your wife, when you were talking about The Cleaner, you've got that expectation because there's a great trailer that goes with it. And I haven't got a thing to, so I'll pretend that I'm doing this. And you've also got Samuel Beep Jackson in the film, and it looks amazing. But because you've seen that, it's got Samuel L. Jackson, and you've got all these bells and whistles, and you think, oh, this is really going to be such a great film. Recent Star Wars films, for instance. Then you think, oh, this film is going to be this good, and you go in with this expectation, and if you'd gone in with no expectations at all, you might have enjoyed the film better because you wouldn't have had that level of expectation. You'd have gone in and you'd have been like, well, that wasn't half bad a film. But because you've got that hype leading up to it, it's not reached that hype level. It's down here a bit further.
There are a number of movies where the trailer has completely and utterly overhyped the film. The first movie that comes to mind is a movie that we almost walked out of. It was The Dead Don't Die. And I remember, directed by Jim Jarmusch, you've got Adam Driver, you've got Bill Murray, you have a phenomenal cast in it. And the trailer made it look to be so funny and so quirky in almost a Wes Anderson Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou kind of feel. And then you get to there and you start watching, and it's like, this is slow and boring. And the best bits were in the trailer. And you're like, at what point does the pain stop? Right. I think with movies, especially ones that were released straight to DVD, there's a stigma, and you can see that with, movies that are made by Netflix now or straight to streaming, where there's a stigma to it. Oh, it's not good enough for the big screen. Oh, it's, the budget doesn't justify the marketing budget it will require to get people into the theaters. And with a movie like Cleaner, which is a phenomenal film, it's very well paced, very smartly written. It's one of those great little whodunit type films, with a few twists here and there, and a really good cast, and possibly the best use of Eva Mendes that we've seen in a film, because there have been a number of films we've covered and she's in it and they so misuse her. Here they actually nailed it. But straight to DVD or straight to streaming does not dictate the quality, but
No.
maybe there's the dichotomy though. A film with a big cast and a big marketing budget that goes to the theaters, and you expect it to be this big experience, and you go in and it's boring or monotonous or not what you thought. You get that sometimes where you watch a movie, it's like, oh, it's going to feel like this. And you get there and it's like, oh, it's completely different. I'd like to call it the Event Horizon phenomenon, where you watch the trailer and like, this is a brilliant sci-fi theory. And for 3/4 of the film, it's a great sci-fi film. And then it turns into basically a space slasher flick, like horror slasher type thing. And you're like, whoa. We just took a wrong left at Albuquerque. And all of a sudden we're down this road. The thing about straight to DVD or straight to streaming is that in a weird twist, your expectations are lowered because of that unconscious bias of the quality of the film based on the release of the media. And maybe that allows you to enjoy it more. And that's why some of these lesser known films, the critics are going to rate it low because it's not good enough to be in the theaters, but you're going to enjoy it more because your expectations are that low.
So, how did that work then for a film like, because you mentioned Event Horizon, and that is a film that I love, but it's, how did it work for a film like From Dusk Till Dawn then? Because when that came out, the trailer for that made it out to be basically the first half of the film, essentially, and then anybody that's seen the film's been out for years. Everybody knows the twist of the film by now. And then suddenly when you get halfway through and it's not just two people on the run from a robbery that's gone bad, suddenly the place where they've made the stop off is full of vampires, and it becomes like a vampire killer thing going on instead. So I don't understand how that film did so well, considering that up until the film coming out, nobody knew what half of the film was about. It's a bit like a Marvel film where you see a trailer that's got everything from the first 10 minutes and nothing else in. So that's the question there is, why do those films work and why does a film like that not work?
I think in the case of From Dusk Till Dawn, and my wife will love this because she is a huge Tarantino fan, you can equate the success of From Dusk Till Dawn in 2 words: Quentin Tarantino. Because when you consider when From Dusk Till Dawn came out, we're looking at the height of films like Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction. And like at that point, anything Tarantino touched, it was going to be like he was the star poster child of indie Hollywood at that time, or more guerrilla style filmmaking. And you also had Robert Rodriguez, who had made his name with Desperado. I think this is before Once Upon a Time in Mexico, which I love Once Upon a Time in Mexico,
Same.
Despite the critics score. Like that's going to be one of the ones I know we're going to be covering in our 3rd year of doing the podcast. It's that sometimes the name on the poster or on the credits alone is enough to drive people in. And I think that's why you have some films where there's not much of a cast or supporting cast, but you got that one big name and that drags you in. It's usually around the time when their star is at its brightest. Like right now, you could put Ana de Armas in anything and people will go and watch it. Same thing with Ryan Reynolds. You could put him in anything. He could literally do anything and people will flock to it because it's Ryan Reynolds. And they've gotten to that point because of the talent that they have, but that talent doesn't necessarily equate to the rest of the project in some cases.
Yeah. I do think, though, that Ryan Reynolds needs to, because it's almost like he's typecast in a sense now. He's going to go there and he's going to do this variation on the Ryan Reynolds character a lot of the time now, where it's a shame really, because I've seen films with him from before this period, when he was that sort of person where there's more depth to him as an actor, but it's almost as though he's being sidelined or shoehorned into this, dare I say, Deadpool style of character in a sense. And that book, be what it may, I mean, Deadpool, the first two Deadpools are still incredible films, and well done to him and the people for doing that. But yeah, I think you're right. I think that might be it.
Well, I think too,
Yeah.
there's an expectation of certain actors. You know, if you go watch a Christopher Walken film, you're going to expect that typical Christopher Walken delivery and weird things coming out of his mouth. But I think with Ryan Reynolds, we really only got the Deadpool kind of notion about him. And of course, that was in movies like Waiting and Van Wilder as well. But I mean, we actually just covered two films that had Ryan Reynolds in them where you didn't have that Ryan Reynolds quippy kind of persona. The first one was R.I.P.D. And in that case, I think it actually needed some of that Ryan Reynolds quip. The other one was Smokin' Aces, where he kind of stole the show in that one. And he played it like straight ahead action film. And I think that shows a lot of where his acting talent can be if given the right property. But right now, he's producing a lot of his own things because he has that star power. He has that ability to create vehicles for himself, but he smartly also knows, I'm Canadian. We have to actually praise Ryan Reynolds on a regular basis. It's actually, it's in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms at this point. But he recognizes what sells a property. And right now his humor sells a property. So make a vehicle that allows him to capitalize on that.
I'll keep bigging up Canada as well, by the way, because Rush are one of the greatest bands ever. Which is weird because someone was telling me that Rush aren't as well looked at in Canada as they are the rest of the world, which is strange.
It's interesting. You have things that are, very Canadian, but they're liked elsewhere in the world more than they're liked at home. There are, and I'm going to jump on a music tangent here. It surprises me. We have some bands that do so well in Canada, but they never make it in the States or outside. Like the Tragically Hip. That was basically Canada's house band. And I think it was more one of those things where we were prouder that they were bigger at home. But you have bands like maybe 3 Days Grace, or even one of my favorite bands of all time is Harem Scarum. And if you like melodic rock, catchy hooks, big choruses, you're going to love them. They've got like 15 albums out. But they never really got big at home. They were only really big in Japan and in Europe. And it's fascinating when you have those situations where you're bigger outside of your own country than you are at home. I mean, obviously, bands like Rush, Triumph, we embrace them, right? And we'll always, as Canadians, we will always embrace our own talent. A couple of Ryans in Hollywood will absolutely embrace them. We still apologize for Celine Dion, but that's aside from the point. But it's all in good humor, good fun, but we're still no matter how much we rip on Nickelback, we still kind of like, yeah, but they're Canadian and they're doing well.
Well done, them. Well
exactly.
done. So it might be interesting. So, what is your earliest or favorite film memory?
I still remember some of those early films. Like my mother brought me to the theater a lot because she was a big movie buff as well. So I mean, I remember being taken to see the first Star Wars film in the theater, and I remember seeing movies like E.T. and The Black Hole. Speaking of Disney films, I remember being taken to go see The Toy at the drive-in movie theater. There was always something about going to the movies, and it's funny too, because when you take a look at box offices now, aside from Barbenheimer influenced weekends, you have a lot of these movies that on any other year would have obliterated the box office. But I think the streaming services and the speed with which those movies going to the streaming services has changed everyone's concept of, it's taught people patience. You know, a movie hits the theaters and you got to wait a year before the DVD comes out. You know, now you could, if you wanted to, like after a week of it being in the theaters only, you could rent it at home digitally and you can watch it and not have to pay exorbitant ticket prices, crazy prices on popcorn. You can make your own damn popcorn, and it's actually better than what you get at the theater some days. You know, it's, and especially if you have a family, right? That's, you know, you're dropping $100 just, you know, just to go see a movie with some popcorn with the kids. That's a lot to ask for 2 hours of hopeful enjoyment, depending on how good the movie is.
Agreed. But I think, so you've gone into that territory there of cinema, and that makes me think of a subject I've mentioned before, which is I think the lockdown affected film release to a certain degree, where when the world went into lockdown over the pandemic, the problem was that they got that many films stacked, ready to come out, that when we came back out of lockdown and they finished post-production on other films that had finished production and would have come out much later, those films that were already ready and these that were in post-production and were finished in time at home by these people, you know, the behind-the-scenes people, there were so many films there when we came back out of lockdown that then we had this crazy situation where film studios were saying, okay, we'll put these big films out at the cinema, and these films, because we want to make all this money, because we've lost money over the last year and a half, 2 years, while the cinemas have been closed, we want to make big money, so we'll have this big film, that big film, that big film, and this film, like, you know, which would be a really good cinema film, like a decent drama or something. I'm trying to think of ones off the top of my head. There's a few of them actually that came out like that, where they'll go, right, that we'll put that on streaming services as well. We'll charge them like, you know, $10 or whatever to stream it for a bit, and then it'll after a few weeks we'll put it free. And I think that sort of harmed the cinema / theatre model essentially. And it needs to, I think they need to go back to having that variety in the cinemas, to be quite honest, because it bothers me that these films that I think are absolute gems that are being thrown straight to streaming, I think it's wrong in a sense, and they need that cinema thing to give you that feel in a way.
I think it's interesting because right now, in my opinion, I think we're at critical mass when it comes to streaming. You know, the whole idea of, you know, a platform like a Netflix was that it challenged the notion that you needed to have, you know, to get your cable package and get the movie channels and get this and that in one big cable package so you could watch these things, but you still have to be patient, you know. And then with, you know, Netflix and HBO before this, they challenged the notions of what was acceptable in a TV show. You know, you had shows like True Blood and Dexter and Game of Thrones, which challenged the guidelines of what you could do in a series. You weren't going to get that on ABC or CBS, right? Because you couldn't, because of restrictions, right? You can't put, you know, beheadings and orgies on, you know, 8:00 p.m. primetime programming. You know, it's not going to cut it, right? HBO, yeah, you can do that. But then everyone saw that Netflix was doing very well, and then everyone else felt like they had to have their own Netflix. And that's the problem with something that does really well and then spawns all the imitators until you get to critical mass, and then you start to see things shrink and either end or merge with other companies. And I think HBO is the biggest proponent of that. You know, you had their HBO Max service, and then within a year they're changing it to Max, and all these properties that they had earmarked for HBO Max are getting shelved, like Batgirl, and all of a sudden they're realizing that the cost to make content for the platform does not equate to the money that the platform brings into, and that's where you're going to get the critical mass, right? Where right now, if you wanted the everything, like the everything, you'd be paying more than your cable package, because it's like Netflix and Apple TV and Prime Video and Hulu if you're in the States, Disney Plus and Paramount Plus and Peacock and BritBox and whatever else is out there. And then you have your fast networks too, the ones that are free, like Tubi and Pluto and Plex. And if you have a Roku device, there's the Roku. There's enough free stuff out there that people are now sitting there going, why am I paying for 17 different streaming services? And it's a shame, because some of them are really, really good. I think Shudder is not necessarily unfairly maligned, but I think it doesn't get the props that it deserves, because this is the one where it doesn't cater to a corporate entity. It caters to a genre. And I was hopeful that Shudder was going to be the template for what the other spawned ones are going to be. We could easily have a science fiction based streaming service and people would pay for it, because sci-fi fans have no problem going back and watching some of the campier, early 80s, late 70s kind of sci-fi films, because that's their bag. Same thing with Shudder. They have no problem going back and watching some of these lesser known horror films, because it's the genre that they're buying into, not necessarily the corporate name attached to it.
But even then, with the corporate name ones, like you mentioned the Disney Plus. So when that came out in the UK, which it had more on there in some ways than the American model, because the fact that we don't have Hulu. So the property that's owned by Disney. When I saw that coming, I thought, oh, maybe we're going to have something a bit interesting here, because I thought, well, Disney have got Disney, they've got Touchstone, they've got 20th Century Fox, got this, got that, got the other. And I thought, wow, we're going to have such an incredible array of, things that are available. But then it's sort of like not quite. This bit's where the big question was, oh, we're not going to put that on there, we won't have that on there. And even now, it's like there's huge gaps of film. It's like they can't make their minds up whether they want to be open for everything or if they want to stay, we're the family friendly company, or it's like it's almost like I don't know how to explain it. Schizophrenic in a sense. Do we want to be this? Do we want to be that? Whereas I think they should just the whole lot. And then the weird thing came out recently with Bob Iger saying, well, now that I'm back, we're going to cut this much of the material on there. And I thought, well, how do you expect people, because he's saying that they're losing customers, essentially. And I thought, well, how does that work then? That if you're losing customers, you think you're going to gain customers by giving them less of a package?
I can see two sides to this. The first one obviously is, there's some things on there that are going to stay on there forever. Disney went out and spent a ton of money on Lucasfilm. So anything Star Wars is going to stay on there because people are going to watch it on a very regular basis. Same thing with Marvel. They spent the money, got Marvel. It's going to be on there. Plus that means they hold on to the properties as well. Not many people, no one can have those Marvel shows on their streaming services. Shows like Bones, I know we're still on Prime Video as well. So there's probably still existing streaming deals left over from before the Fox purchase. So, I mean, you're going to see that kind of hold on a little bit. But I think too, there is also only so much server space available to them, because if you need to buy more servers to hold all the content, which is, all the traffic is starting to access at the same time, that's an infrastructure cost that's going to be, it's going to make the service, they're going to have to raise the price. So if they lose some of the content that's probably not getting as much in the way of people actually watching it, then that means you don't have to expand the servers. You can just change the content. But also, the thing with Willow, the recent series, them saying, yeah, well, no, we're going to pull that off kind of thing. It's not that it wasn't good, but now they have the ability to sell the physical media and capitalize more on the property, because the people who liked Willow are going to be ticked that they can't watch it anymore. But then they'll go and buy the DVD, so they struck twice. People who signed for the service, watch Willow, now the series is gone, now you got to go buy the DVD. That's why people are so, get your physical media. Get the movies that you love on a format that you can watch whenever you want. Music, buy the CDs, because, some of them disappear off Spotify every now and then. The services are great when they have what you're looking for, but when you have very, for lack of a better term, esoteric likes, and they're there and then they're not there. There are the number of bands on Spotify where they have every album but the one I'm looking for. It's, and it becomes frustrating because you get like maybe a song here or a song there that were on a compilation, but you don't get the deeper cuts.
Incidentally, you've mentioned the first thing I watched when Disney Plus came to the UK and I got the subscription, because the first thing that we watched was the film Black Hole, because I remember watching it as a kid and loving it when I saw it at the cinema. And I've always thought that was one of those films that people, I think, unfairly put down, because I think it's a really good film.
Well, it is one of the first PG films that Disney had put out, right up there with another film that we had covered on the podcast, Midnight Madness. And I think the best thing they did for Midnight Madness was they really kind of took the Disney name off of the marketing and just put it out there as a, Cannonball Run-esque, but still friendly for kids kind of film. With the Black Hole, like, Disney was all over this, and it was a lot more intense than I think kids were ready for at the time. I loved it, to the point of, I remember having the storybook and vinyl, so you could pop the vinyl on and read along with the storybook at the time. Change the page when you hear the jingle, right? But in hindsight, Black Hole was ahead of its time, because Disney and slightly more intense action, not necessarily geared to a G audience, back in 1980, that they weren't ready for that. Now it's fine, it's no problem. There's an audience for everything. So,
I think you're right. It's definitely not meaning the pun, not meaning to be a pun here, but it is a very dark film. I mean, I know it's called Black Hole, but it is a dark film and very, there's certain elements to it which are not, shall we say, little kid friendly. Yeah, no,
it's, for teenagers, it's great. Right. But the thing is, you take a look at those robots with the paste on googly eyes that they had for those things. The robots look like they should be kid friendly. And then you go in and you have these robots trying to rescue themselves from giant balls of flame that are going down this tunnel. It's like, this is intense. Under 13, and a lot of it I think has to deal with the maturity of the kid at the time.
Absolutely. So, what was your inspiration then to making the podcast that you make? What were you listening to that inspired you, if you were listening to anything?
Well, it's funny. So It's Not That Bad is actually my second podcast. The first one was one I had done called Made You a Mixtape.
Yes.
And that was just an interview show where, talk to anybody, and everything got, culminated to the one final question. And that question was, if you had to introduce yourself to a total stranger, but instead of saying, hi, I'm so-and-so, and this is what I do, you handed them a tape. And on that tape were songs that told the story of you, what songs were going to be on that tape and why are they there. So you learned a lot more about the interviewee by the music that they personally associate with. So that was, and that podcast was, I think, driven more out of a lack of outside connection, because this was a pandemic podcast. This was because, as I mentioned to you as we were getting ready for this show, I'm in a band and we were averaging 35, 40 shows a year. So you're going out there. That was my weekend exercise, right? You go out there, you play live music for people. You get to talk to them. It's this great energy that you get from playing live, and then everything stops, just stops. And we had actually had a gig lined up for the St. Patrick's Day, which was the night, they were going to shut everything down that night. The bars were supposed to close. This was literally the next day. Everything was in lockdown. And I remember we called up the bar and we're like, so I guess we're not playing tonight because you guys are going to have to close at a certain time. And then we didn't play another show for a little over a year. And, during that time, you miss certain things. You miss, I didn't miss going to the office. That was fine. I like working from home, but you miss the going out energy and not having that ability to play live and create something, at that level. It's like, okay, I need to do something. And, the interview format, I work in television, I'm a video editor. So the idea of interviewing people was always there. And so I just reached out to a couple of friends at the time who I knew had interesting things that they did. And I said, let's try something. Let me try this out. And, over it lasted from about a full year. And that was basically, 2001. And, I had a chance to interview some great musicians and other authors, singer-songwriters, other podcasters, and it was fun. And during that year, I'm like, I really like this podcasting thing. I'm going to keep going with this. How can I do more, right? Because you're at home the entire time. How can I do more? And so the idea was what do I love to do? Well, I like to watch films, and I've always loved watching bad films. We often talk about the days of Blockbuster Video and going in and renting 7 movies for 7 days. And, so if you're there with someone all right, you pick 3, and then we're going to find the most off the wall pick to fill that 7th. And sometimes it's based on the title alone. And that's not always a good thing, but it's one of those things where it allowed you to, watch movies that you wouldn't normally watch on a regular basis. I would never in my wildest dreams have said, hey, I got nothing to do for 2 hours. Let's watch Mac and Me. That seems like fun. Right. Not, but when you go in and there are so many podcasts out there where, and I'm not trying to be dismissive of other podcasts, but there's a lot of podcasts out there where their entire thing is just crapping on films. Right? Hey, this movie came out. Let's talk about it. And it usually devolves into why this film isn't that good or whatever, or being disappointed about things. I think you're seeing a lot of that too with some of the Marvel, getting back to that. But I always like the ability or the thought that even in the crappiest of films, there's that one silver lining, right? It's like listening to an arguably bad album, but there's that one song. There's that one song that you're like, okay, this is a kind of a bop. And so the impetus became, okay, so we're going to watch these films that are lowly rated, and that there had to be a criteria. It wasn't just us saying, this is a bad film. In our opinion, it's a bad film, but we're going to watch it anyways. No. By linking it in to the Rotten Tomatoes critic score, there was a quantifier there. There's a qualifier there. And at first we were like, yeah, just 50% and under, right? Now we realize that 60% is that it's almost like that college pass, right?
Yep.
So if we joke around that if the tomato is green, the movie can be seen. So long as it's under 60%, we'll watch it. And the good thing is we're never going to be without a movie to cover. This podcast could go on for decades, and because every year there's movies that come out that they're critically panned. But I love the idea of trying to find the good things to say about it and looking at it in a way, in a positive aspect, because it's surprisingly, when you go into a movie knowing that the critics have panned it, but looking for something good about it, you actually find yourself enjoying the movie more. And even the ones that are so bad, you sit there and go, oh, this is horrible, but it's fascinatingly horrible. Like, I remember we did an episode on Samurai Cop, which is such a bad film. Like, it's poorly made, it's poorly acted, it's poorly written, but you find yourself enjoying the unintentional camp quality of it. You know, there's a fight scene where the guy's wig falls off because he cut his hair mid-production, not knowing there were going to be more shoots. And like, it's like, I can't believe this made the final cut, but it's there. And there's just such an earnestness to the making of the film. You can't not smile at some of the bad dialogue, because it takes itself so seriously and not played for camp. That's where camp comes from. You know, the nice thing too is, you know, the shows that I did an episode on, like episode 1 on Mega Shark versus Giant Octopus. So definitely not anyone's, you know, idea of a good movie. And I just did it solo just to try it out, just to trial run it. And then, you know, a couple of guests from podcasters that I had either talked to or guested on their episodes. The guys from Playlist Wars, Brian Colburn and Gomez, they've been so super supportive throughout the Made You a Mixtape run, and now It's Not That Bad, and now my other music podcast, There Can Only Be One. You've got Greg from Movie Date Night. He comes on a regular basis, and I got to know him by guesting on the Moral Combat podcast and doing a couple of episodes with them. So we've created this small little group that has, you know, kind of, you know, jump at the chance to hop onto the show, have a laugh, watch a bad movie, but yet sit there and really enjoy aspects of the film. And it's a very supportive circle too. Like, you know, again, I mentioned, you know, Brian and Gomez from Playlist Wars, and now they have their own shows with My Weekly Mixtape and the Sleevy G Show. And you've got Sean Faust, who's a musician from New Jersey, who pops onto the show every now and then. And we have an open door policy too. Like, if you want to come on the show, drop me a line, right? Like, pitch a movie. You know, so long as it's an under 60% tomatometer, you know, come on to the show, because the whole idea of it is, if someone has pitched a movie, it's because they're passionate about it. So they're going to come in with this, I will defend this film mentality, which always gives a more positive feel to the episode. And you find yourself, like, even if you went into the film skeptical, you find yourself caught up in the, you know, infectious energy brought on by someone who's ready to defend a film themselves.
Yep. It reminds me that of an episode of Stuart World Order. He had Bill from Bill Reads Bad Reviews and Sean from Review It Yourself on, and they were shocked when Sean gave what was it, Batman and Robin 10 stars, because he really does like that film a lot.
Batman and Robin, eh? I'm going to have
There
to
you
call
go.
Sean back up. Yeah, because I mean, I remember going on to Defend It Yourself on his show there and talking about
Yeah.
the pirate movie, which I freaking love the pirate movie. And he had never seen it, and he went in and watched it. And he's like, "This is gloriously fun." Right? It's it's critically panned, but it's gloriously fun. But that's the thing, right? Like, every podcaster that I have dealt with so far has been very positive and very welcoming and helpful. And I think it's because, especially over the last 3 years, we've all lost a little bit of that connection that we had with the outside world. And here you have people from around the world, really, able to meet in the middle and discuss things that move them. Like, we're not a political podcast, and I don't ever want to be a political podcast. Like, even if we talk about a movie where someone has, in the history of their life gone on to, for lack of a better term, warrant being canceled. Like, anytime Jeffrey Jones is in the film, we actually stop and say, okay, let's pause for a second here. We're going to talk about Jeffrey Jones, but we're not going to talk about, what he did in his personal life, because, just because he's a horrible person doesn't mean that the performance in the film isn't bad. So we limit the conversation to just the performance in the film. You can disagree with a musician's political standpoint and yet still think that the song is pretty good. Like, I don't agree with pretty much anything Ted Nugent says these days, but I'll still rock out to Cat Scratch Fever. I'm not gonna burn a CD, right? It's you can separate the art from the artist, and that's okay.
I should have listened. I wish you'd given me that advice before I did a Beatles podcast recently, because they were talking about Rolf Harris, who is very questionable nowadays. And I avoided joining the conversation, and I feel bad about it, because it's almost as though I felt wrong doing that in a way. And you've got the same thing now with, you can reel them off, like the Jeffrey Jones, Kevin Spacey, for instance. You've got the same thing there with questionable things with him, but there's no arguing that he was an incredible actor in Seven and American Beauty and films, but like you said, you've got to separate, when you do these shows, you've got to be able to separate that from the artistic side, essentially.
Well, it's like I was listening to one of your episodes recently, and you had on, and I think it was episode 135. I can't remember the name of the podcast that they did, and they were talking about the idea of never meet your heroes. And I remember one of the guys was talking about his brother worked in film, and we got to meet this guy that's like, oh, that must have been cool. It's like, no, kind of a dick, right? And then all of a sudden you realize that, oh, you're the way you then look at that actor or whatever might be a little tainted, if you will. With someone like Kevin Spacey, you're right, there are films that will always stand the test of time. And before the allegations came out, you were very happy to watch it. And that art, you enjoyed it. And then the real person kind of peeks out from behind the curtain, and you get to see a little bit of what you didn't want to see. But that doesn't mean that the film is any worse. If you can disassociate the art from the artist, then you can continue to enjoy the art that you love. Like, I'll still watch The Negotiator. I think it's a great film, and he's great in it. A lot of his films are great in it. That's where we draw the line. We're not going to ever on the podcast evolve into moral arguments about an actor when all we're talking about is their portrayal of a fictional character.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll learn from that now. I'll not do it again. Thank you. But and then you start in the podcast. So as you lead up to it, what sort of research do you do? And do you have a specific structure that you follow during the show?
Well, it's funny. The structure of the show really was cemented right off the bat from the first episode.
Yeah.
I wanted to have a tease for the show. I wanted to have some little fun little blurb that we kind of geared everyone up before the show music comes in, and then, introduce the guest, talk a little bit, and then we do what we call trailerize. And, I'll admit I'm inspired by Honest Trailers. I like their YouTube channel. But we don't do a starring section like they do. We don't change the name of the movie like they do at the end. It's just basically, at first, I think the first 6 or 7 episodes, all we did was we read either the Netflix description, or in one case where we covered Destiny Turns on the Radio, we literally read the back of the VHS box and went from there. But now, because I enjoy, writing in a funny kind of way, I have fun with it. But then once those are written, it's who's starring in the film. We like to do the who almost starred in the film, because that's always fascinating when you take a look at, okay, this role was played by this character or this actor, but it was almost played by one of these people, and it sits there and makes you question why this person got it, or this person was so much better than these other people, or in the case of certain films, what was their idea of what the character originally was supposed to be, and then how it ended up. There was a movie we covered called The Circle, which had Emma Watson and Tom Hanks in it. And the original idea was for the Emma Watson character to be played by Alicia Vikander, because if you read the book, The Circle by Dave Eggers, Emma Watson is much more likable than the character she plays in the book. So if they were going to stick to the source material, Alicia Vikander would have been a better choice. But because they changed the tonality of the ending of the movie from the way the book ends, and the main character becomes much more likable, then you want someone like an Emma Watson, who is a really likable actress. But then it's a lot of, the research itself is based on who's in it, who made it, what was the budget, because sometimes the budget is fascinating to look at. And then, the Razzie Awards or the Stinker's Bad Movie Awards, or sometimes like actual accolades. And, it gives you a background of the impact of the film before you get into talking about the film, and then we just break it down, and we go through actor by actor, and then we talk about certain other things that are important to the film. When we did Tron Legacy, we had to talk about the Daft Punk soundtrack, because it was such a big part of that movie that made that film as good as it was. There was one film we did, The Immaculate Room, where I think my MVP was actually the cinematographer of the film, because you're basically shooting this in a blank white room, so you don't really have much to work with. But the DOP on that film made that film so freaking good, and that's that. We get to kind of tee up some of the creatives behind the camera at that point as well, because sometimes it's them that make the film that good. And then really it's, you boil it down to who is your MVP, because that's always fascinating, because 3 people can watch a movie and they can have different takeaways as to the best part of that film. So whoever they choose as their MVP, it might not always line up with myself or anyone else on the show.
Yeah, I mean, you touch on it in your show a lot. I mean, you even mention it in the trailer, that there are people behind the scenes. People have worked hard on these films, and in a sense, just writing them off is almost sweeping aside all the hard work that they've done, in a way. And you look at these films, and like you said, some of these films, you watch them and you think, there is no way that film warrants as good a soundtrack as it's got, or as good cinematography as it's got. You'll watch a film, you might watch a some people might see it as a lesser Western from back in the day, and people might watch that. So you watch it and you think, oh God, well, they're a bit wooden with the acting, the dialogue's a bit on the duff side or whatever. But and then you go from that, and then suddenly it'll pan out or it'll zoom out from the cowboys on the horses. You'll zoom out from that to the vista, and you'll think, bloody hell, that's amazing. That cinematography and how they've caught like Yosemite or somewhere in the background or something. You think, where the hell did that come from?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, people will sit there and rip on The Last Jedi, but when you take a look at the cinematography on that island that Luke is on, I guarantee you, anyone who went to watch The Last Jedi sit there going, I would really love to visit that island and just see what that island is like. Or even, the scene where they're on, like, I guess what's like a salt world, because, the ships are flying and got the red dust kind of like visually. It's a remarkable visual to see on the big screen. And, part of it is kind of, I'm a video editor by profession. So I have, I've been behind the camera in one form or another since I was like 13 years old. So, and I'm not going to say how old I am right now, but it's up there in years in working in TV in one form or another. And I have an appreciation for directors and cinematographers and audio designers and composers. I'm a musician as well. So, I can completely appreciate and kind of get sucked into the soundtrack at times. And, I've never worked on a big film. I've worked on smaller productions, but I've never worked on a big film. And I know the passion that goes into making these projects, even films that don't end up going anywhere. It doesn't negate the work put in by the people behind the camera. And, I'll never be as good an actor as the people that we see on our screens. I'll never be as good a director as the people behind the lens and making those visuals. Maybe one day I'll get to edit a film. I don't know. That'd be nice. But I'll never be, until I get practice, I'll never be as good as some of the editors that put together those films and really make sense out of, the notes on the paper and the different takes on camera. So, I approach these films knowing that, there's enough noise out there that maybe one day, one of these actors will hear the show and, we call things out like plot holes and whatnot when they need to be called out. But that doesn't detract from our appreciation of the art and the work that went into the art.
Absolutely. Yep, definitely. So how do you record and edit the show? I'm guessing you do it much like we're doing now, by, some form of, online, like Zoom, Zencaster, Riverside, and those sort of things.
So I'm very fortunate. My wife is an absolute gem and has supported me through, whether it be by being a guest on the show or by saying, okay, you need those microphones, go buy those microphones. So we have a little basement recording studio here at our house. And, I have these, people are going to laugh, but the microphones that you're hearing us on right now and on the shows, those are $40 microphones that we bought off of Amazon.
Wow.
Now, don't get me wrong. I spruced them up a bit in post-production, but, they're not expensive microphones. The art to me comes in the editing itself. But we record on a Zoom PodTrack P8, which allows us to have multiple microphones plugged into it, as well as a USB channel, and record those channels separately. And then I'll take everything into post-production and, sweeten the audio from there and really go through the editing process. And then anyone who's calling in, or like, as we are right now, I use Zencaster, but I don't use the recording on their end, because now, I mean, it was great before the change. We had unlimited audio recording, but now you only have 2 hours per month.
A month.
And So I save that 2 hours for whenever we do one of our grading on a curve specials, where we have like 5 people on, and rather than talk about how good the movies are, we'll take 5 movies in a category and rank them in amongst themselves. The first one we did was superhero films. But the movies we talked about were Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, and Catwoman, and Elektra, Jonah Hex, and Green Lantern. No one is ever going to say that Jonah Hex was their favorite superhero film of all time. But in that group of 5, it might rank. Something's got to rank number 1. So, and that's always a fun one. We have a lot of laughs during those specials, but that's where I save that 2 hours of recording. So I just record the channels on my board onto an SD card, and then I pop that into Adobe Audition.
Bit of a spoiler here, but you will be hearing my opinion of the film Jonah Hex in an episode of Stu World Order coming up, but I don't know when it is. The strange thing about Stu is that he records his episode so far ahead. So we recorded it, I think, in June, or it might have even been May. And he says, this will be coming out late October, beginning of November. I think that's when it's coming out. But yes, I got to talk with him about the film Jonah Hex, having watched it for the first time for that.
First, that is planning goals. Like, shout out to the podcast that, I'd love to get to the point where I have that much advanced recording like taken care of, because then you can allow yourself to, take the week or 2 vacation and then not have to cram to make sure that you have those releases put out. I mean, with any creative content that you put out there, the goal is consistency. Right. And, that's why with the new podcast, There Can Only Be One, that's bi-weekly, because, I can take 2 hours, watch a film, and then spend about an hour and a half putting all my notes together. And that's fine. With There Can Only Be One, the whole idea of that podcast is to go through an artist's entire studio discography and make a playlist of the best songs, but every album has to be represented, and you can only pick 1 song per album. So in some cases, you're listening to 15, 18 studio albums, and then doing all your notes after that, after you've made your playlist. Some artists it's fine. I just recorded Led Zeppelin as an episode. Yep. That's only 9 albums. So that's not that hard to go through, and those albums aren't necessarily that long. But then you get, I think the second episode I did was Tom Petty, and that's 18 studio albums. Because we also did the Mudcrutch albums as well, because he was on those albums, and that's a lot of music to listen to. And I'm not just gonna take a look at the track listing and pick the big song. I'm going to listen to the entire album. And because sometimes it's a first listen for me, especially on artists where, your knowledge of their songs is the hits, the radio plays.
Yeah.
But I love deep cuts. Sometimes those deep cuts stick with me. Sometimes it's easy. It's like, I know that album. I've listened to that album a million times. I know exactly what song is on there. We did an episode on Metallica, and I didn't even have to think about the Black Album. Like, yep, that's that one right there. But yeah, no, it's it's that consistency. So for Stu World Order to be able to have episodes recorded that far in advance, that's a testament to smart planning and good podcasting at that point. So, I've never had the chance to talk to the Stu World Order podcast, but they have my complete and utter props from here. So,
yep, Stu's whole thing is a comic book film, and it's so. He got me to pick 3 different films, or well, he didn't. He got me to pick 3 numbers, so you don't know what those films are until he comes back to you with what 3 films they equate to, and it's always changing as well. He'll randomize it every time. So when he's had one film already picked, the numbers get changed around. So, and then so I picked three films, and that's the one that I chose out of the three. Famously, I've had three questionable films, shall we say, twice. Both times I've been on, because the time I was on before that, I did Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3, Turtles in Time, when they went back in time to feudal Japan. That was fun. But yeah, so it's interesting. But then he'll say, no matter what the film is, you've got to come out with positives and then whatever's negative about it. So he says, even if it's a great film, so if it's a film that's universally panned, you've still got to come out with some positive for it. And if it's a film that is universally raised up there as a 5-star film by most people, you've still got to come out with something that's a bit negative, even though it's tentatively that way. And then he'll pick a subject, a topic that goes with the film as well. So it made it interesting, that's for sure.
I need to start listening now, because that sounds like a ton of fun.
That's why I went on about it, is because it fits your whole thing entirely there.
And Jonah Hex, I actually enjoyed quite a bit. It was actually a first watch for me when I had to watch it. And that's the funny thing. Some of the films that we cover, we've watched it ad nauseum, and because we love it, and that's when we take up our pitchforks and defend the film to the death. But some of them are first watches, and especially when a guest comes on and they pitch a movie, it's like, I can't believe I've never actually watched this. Like, I can't remember who came on. Sorry, it was the Dragons of Genesis podcast came on, and we talked Empire Records. And as much of a music fan as I am, and a musician, I had never actually watched Empire Records. I'm like, I can't believe I've listened to the soundtrack countless times, never watched the film.
Right. So, recording and editing. So then you've got the music and the logo as well. I mean, he said, I'm slightly better than my attempt at doing a make-do logo, because I couldn't remember what yours was. So if you look at the picture I've got for you there, that's supposed to be a video cassette in the top corner. That is a really bad DVD. And then that Cine Duff there that I've got there, that's supposed to be like one of those neon signs that you have outside a theatre. And then the television there as well with, what is it, Douche Pictures I've got there. And it's just me trying to be humorous there. But yeah, so where did you get your own logo from, and the musical background, intro and everything?
So I have an account with Storyblocks with their audio. So whatever music you download from there, once you have that contract, or once you have that subscription, you own the rights to that music to be able to use it in your projects, even if it is for money. So it's one of those things where, I paid for this and I own it, and at least I own the rights to use it. So even if a track that's on, like, say, a free library all of a sudden becomes no longer free to use, they can never come back and say, oh, by the way, now you owe us this much money. No, I've already paid for this. And because I do a little bit of freelance work on the side, this is kind of a business expense for me as well. So, it just, it works out well. And then with the artwork, I went to Pixabay, which you have free pictures that you can get there, and found a film strip picture, a little bit of film scratch on it. And then I just popped it into Photoshop, colorized it a bit, because it was just black and white and, shades of gray then. So added a bit of red to it, and just the font over top of it. That's, it's a simple enough logo. And the name of the show is right up there on Front Street. So it's easy to recognize exactly what's going on. And then with the different episode icons, I've basically got that film strip as a border, and just take a bit of the movie poster to fit into the square. So when it's on Spotify in your car or on your phone, you can see the bit of the movie poster in the framing with the title of it on there. So it's simple. You know, I'm not a graphic designer, but it gets the point across, I think.
I think so. And I mean, yeah. What more do you need? I mean, it's definitely a positive show, that's for sure, because you know it is looking at the positive in films, and I do like that about the show a lot. So, arranging the guest, do they just flock to you, or do you have to put out a call every now and again?
I'm very fortunate that there's a number of recurring guests. The majority of the shows feature my wife, who loves watching a bad movie as much as I do. And she and I got together in broadcasting college. So this is something that, we both studied how to, make shows and, do audio and the like. So this is, this is something that she and I grew up doing. Not necessarily in a podcast format, but at least, aimed at television. And this is a way for us to enjoy the same hobby together as well. And then, as I mentioned before, there's a recurring, list of guests that come on. Gomez is going to come on. Greg is going to come on for movie date night. I also teach at a broadcasting college. So I tell my students that if they want to, maybe get some reps or just to have fun and talk about a movie, they're more than welcome to come on to the show and pick a movie. And really it's, I love when other podcasters come on because they know mic technique and it sounds good. Yeah. But I love, especially when you have podcasters from different parts of the world, because you're going to get different takes on things. People are going to see movies very differently, or sometimes like with the movie Legend, it's like, which version of the movie did you see? And you get those different perspectives on it. And the fact that podcasting allows the ability for those shows to be heard literally around the world, and to be able to get guests from the UK, from the States, from wherever. And that's fascinating to me.
Yep. I agree with you. I find this exactly the same thing, that is fascinating. That is. So here we go. The bit that I made up while we've been talking that you know about. So I don't, you're starting to make me wonder whether I've written this one out correctly. Top 5. What would you say the top 5 films that you think people in general, are not looked down? Well, they're not looked at well by the majority, but you think you really enjoy yourself?
Ooh. Yeah, I have very select choice in films. Okay. The first movie I'm going to put on that list, I know it's so poorly reviewed, but I can't help but laugh hysterically whenever I watch it, is Kung Pao Enter the Fist. It is so completely out there, but yet the concept is still brilliant. Taking these old films and superimposing himself into these films, very much like Steve Martin did with Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid. But then taking that concept and putting it into the martial arts 1970s vibe of those films. And it's just so out there. It's just so weird. And the jokes are completely asinine. But every now and then you want that. Every now and then you just want stupid fart humor, and I enjoy that. I love that film, and I will defend that film to its dying day. There was a movie that my wife Carrie and I saved for the 50th episode. We wanted to make that episode special, and that was Repo the Genetic Opera. This is a film that we saw the trailer for it on a DVD that we had rented from Blockbuster. So that's how you get introduced to a lot of different films. And, here you have a dystopian science fiction opera starring Paul Sorvino, Anthony Stewart Head, Alexa Pena Vega, Sarah Brightman, and Paris Hilton. And it's so good. But it's also like, this is the film that we realized was kind of the litmus test for our friendships. And that if you watch this film and you liked it, you were kind of our people. And if you watched it and you said, what the hell is this? They might run or we might run, one of the two. But the music is so good. And Anthony Stewart Head is absolutely phenomenal. Like, I know there was the musical episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but I didn't realize just how good a voice he has. And like, hold that DVD up high. Like, I really truly enjoyed it. Other
I've
movies,
got an album of his.
right? Movies that are really like, there's so many of them. Tron Legacy.
Yes.
I think.
Yep.
I personally think Tron Legacy is better than the original. And I know the that's the initial take, but there was something about Tron Legacy because it wasn't just a movie about a guy trapped in the video game and having to fight his way out.
Yep.
It was world building, and you all of a sudden had a hierarchy on the grid, and instead of making a 2-hour action adventure, you had a 2-hour launch point for what could easily be a franchise. And then it did actually lead to the Tron, I think it was Tron Insurrection animated series.
Yep. I enjoyed that series, actually.
It's so good.
What I saw of it, yeah.
Speaking of Disney Plus, it's such a good series and built on the world building that was done in Tron Legacy. I don't know what they're going to do with the new Tron film that they're planning, but remains to be seen. Okay.
Out of interest, I'll just thank everybody that puts torrents out there so that I was able to watch that, because it was never available in the UK.
Right.
That series.
We talked about Marvel movies earlier.
Yep.
I have one of those weird likes of the first Punisher film with Thomas Jane and John Travolta.
Yep.
I have parts of it I don't like, but I thought Thomas Jane was a fantastic Punisher. Like, he had the tonality of Frank Castle down pat. And John Travolta as this, crime boss, as basically the direction of Frank Castle's ire and revenge, and that part of it they really nailed. Like, there's a lot of parts around that film that could be removed, and it's a shame that we didn't get another Thomas Jane Punisher movie. But I still think it was really, really good. So what is that now? That's 4. Number 5. Probably the Pirate movie. Again, another musical. And if you want to hear me, wax on probably for way too long about that film, you can go listen to the Review It Yourself podcast. But there was just something so genuinely fun about that film. And that was one of those movies that was on the movie channels like in the early 80s a lot. So it was campy. It was the songs were catchy. It's based on the Pirates of Penzance, loosely based on the Pirates of Penzance, with some really bad 80s numbers thrown into there. But the guy who played the Pirate King, whose name escapes me now, was just so over the top and just so stage that you couldn't help but enjoy every time he was on the screen. Christy McNichol was absolutely enjoyable in this film. And it's fun. It's a tonic. You want a musical, go in for something that's going to be a palate cleanser, as opposed to, I think that's why Barbenheimer kind of worked. Go watch Oppenheimer, and then go watch Barbie as a palate cleanser.
Okay. I've not watched either of those yet. You're making me think that I need to talk to Stu and probably do a series all about musicals. I think with Stu.
Oh, call me up for that one, because I got some musicals to talk about.
Because my favourite film of all time is a musical, which is, but it's a film that's universally seen by many people as a great film, which is Singing in the Rain. That's my favourite film of all time.
The thing with musicals is it's a lot of it depends on the musical taste, right?
Yeah.
If you're into big Broadway style musicals, then something like Phantom of the Opera, Les Miserables, people loved that movie. That's kind of like the bread and butter. But then you get musicals that are more like Grease, right? Grease is a great movie. Grease 2, not so much. But there's still aspects of Grease 2 that you can sit there and say, okay, I get it, right? Rock operas, like a Repo the Genetic Opera. They're going to cater to that genre of fan. And there are some films out there that may as well have been a musical. Like, we have an upcoming episode for our 2-year anniversary, which will probably be out by the time this episode comes out, on Howard the Duck. And at times we're like, it kind of feels like a musical time, because every now and then a song will come in and the lyrics are directly related to what the character is feeling at the time. And it's like, yeah, okay, maybe it's a musical at points, but why not go all the way? We'll take the Howard the Duck musical.
You preempted what I was just thinking then, and I was just thinking, would Howard the Duck have worked better if they'd just gone all out and made it into a musical? And by the way, to everybody out there, Howard the Duck is a Marvel character.
Howard the Duck was not going to work in 1986 because, you're 2 years after the Temple of Doom. You're 3 years after Return of the Jedi, and George Lucas is a producer on the film. And, again, the weight of expectation, right? And they went in and made a Howard the Duck film as well as they could, right? But I don't think the appetite was there, probably from Marvel side or from Lucasfilm side, to do a Howard the Duck musical, because that's not what you were doing in 1986. The goal was to take this Marvel character and build that world. And it's funny too when you do the research on that film, and you realize that because of the box office bomb of Howard the Duck, it actually indirectly led to the creation of Pixar. You realize that even in the worst of results come the best of outcomes. But I think now, like, people have been talking about doing this, Avengers musical number that they had in Hawkeye and turning that into something at Disney theme parks. Yep. I'd go see that in a heartbeat. But if they came out and said, we're doing a Marvel special presentation of Howard the Duck the musical, people would lose their ever-loving minds. And you could argue, in a sense, that the Guardians of the Galaxy holiday special had a little bit of that musical feel, especially off the top. I mean, we were singing that I don't know what Christmas is, but Christmas Time Is Here song for months after that came out. Like, it was, A, it's a catchy as hell song, but B, it perfectly fit the character, considering how much music meant to Star-Lord.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the great things about that. So what advice would you give to anybody starting their own podcast?
The very first thing I'm going to say is, do not put any weight at all into a podcast's analytics. It's, it takes time to get any sort of numbers, and there is no, there's no magic button. There's no magic wand. There's no special sauce that you got to put on something that's going to make it take off. It's time and repetition and consistency. And even that in itself might not ever come out. Like, we are closing in on 100 episodes and 2 years. And I have no problem saying that the show has been listened to 2,500 times, over 2,500 times. And that's great. That is fantastic if you're taking a look at that big number. But if you're taking a look at the individual day numbers, you're looking at 1, maybe 3 listens in a day, 10 if you're lucky on a release day. And you have to realize that that's the norm at times, especially when you're starting out. If you're lucky, there's going to be stretches of days when no one hears the show. So the question you have to ask yourself is, why are you making the show? I'll admit that if I'm not making something, then I'm not necessarily fulfilled. And the beauty part about podcasting is, it allows me to have a reason to watch movies I wouldn't normally go out of my way to watch. It gives me a reason to listen to albums that maybe I wouldn't necessarily listen to the whole album, or experience artists that maybe I don't necessarily listen to on a regular basis, and have conversations with people who, I may not ever have the chance to talk to those people and reach out. And then if you're lucky, you get to guest on some of those shows and then talk about other topics that you didn't realize that you'd have that opportunity to talk about, those different passions. Like, I've had the opportunity to talk on everything from movie podcasts to music podcasts to wrestling podcasts to soccer podcasts. And, that's the beauty part, is that not everyone is one thing. People have multiple passions, and it allows you to be able to talk about those certain things. But just ask yourself the question is, if you make this thing and no one listens, are you still happy with the thing that you made? It can't be about the equipment. It can't be about the fame, and it can't be about the payday, right? We don't monetize a thing, and that's okay, right? This is my hobby, right? And if people listen, that's great. And maybe one day I'll make a merch shirt and maybe one person might buy it, and I'd consider that a win, right? But even if they didn't, as long as they didn't put any money into it, then that's okay, right? If, in 10 years from now, I'm still watching bad movies and having a good laugh with my wife or whoever wants to come on the show, that's a win. That's an absolute win, So it should never be about the analytics. Also, too, don't bog yourself down with listening to other podcasts and comparing yours to theirs. There's going to be podcasts out there that have better mics, better editing, better production value, better guests. That doesn't matter, right?
No.
Did you make something? Yes. Did it get out there? Yes. And did one person listen to it? Yes. And that's a win. One of the podcasts I listened to when I first started podcasting, and it was David Tennant does a podcast with.
Yes.
And I love that show. More so in its simplicity, right? It is literally exactly what the title is. David Tennant does a podcast with.
Yep.
Right? And the episodes, each episode is someone that he has either worked with or in some cases just happens to be fascinated by. Like, obviously David Tennant, his episode with Michael Sheen, people are going to tune into that because staged has been the greatest thing that ever hit television, in the last 3 years. Still waiting for season 3, by the way, here in Canada. So if David and Michael can get on that and get that show over here, that'd be real nice.
I'm sure he's listening.
Right. Of course he is. Right. But the depth of the conversations, and especially the episodes with Billy Piper and Kristen Ritter, those were phenomenal episodes because there was just such a comfort in the conversation. And the other podcast I'm going to mention too is Brian Colburn's podcast, My Weekly Mixtape, because the thing with his podcast is that, in execution, it's simplicity. It's two people putting together a 20-song mixtape based on a subject, and you go back and forth, and you're trying to kind of match tonality and a feel, and this is how you would make a mixtape. But the thing is, when you're listening to the show, and this is the beauty of his podcast, and I've told him about this before, the beauty of his show is that when you're listening to the episode, even if you're not involved, you find yourself playing along. You're sitting there and, as the person's trying to figure out what song they're going to put it on, you're literally thinking of songs that you would put on the mixtape yourself. That's it's a simple concept, but for him, it involves something that he loves doing, which is talking about music, based on something that he loved doing, which was making a mixtape.
Yep. And
when you're passionate about something, no matter who's listening, your energy is infectious to the listener. And if you're, I always say, and I compare this to when I'm, on stage with my band, is that if you're having fun on stage, the crowd is going to have fun. If you're having fun in the conversation, the listener is going to enjoy the conversation more. It's just, it's a give and take of that infectious energy that comes with it. So, don't worry about the numbers. Worry about having fun. That's the be all end all of it. Don't compare yourself to anybody else, and don't needle yourself on the quality of the podcast audio at first. You don't need a $700 microphone in order to be able to make a podcast. You can do it with something on Amazon. You don't need a super expensive audio board and super rig and racks with compressors and the like. You don't. You don't need to spend money on studio rental time and going to some place and having them record it for you. If you have a decent enough microphone and a computer that can record it, maybe whether it be through OBS or Audacity or whatever free software that you can get, you can turn that into a podcast. And if you're passionate about what you're talking about, people are going to listen to you be passionate about it. Podcasting is about, it's about passion. These shows are made from passion. They are listened by people who share that passion.
Absolutely. So, I was going to ask you actually what podcast you listen to, but you've just done that automatically.
I kind of jumped ahead of the game, didn't I?
You did, but you're used to being a podcaster after all these episodes. Incidentally, I actually put a list together just as a thing yesterday because I was talking to somebody else who does Death Is Not the End, and his is about picking songs for the, if you could score your life, what would you pick? And I actually did pick, just not seriously, but I just picked 8 songs, and as a just to get a response to this. So they include Marillion, Queen, The Zombies, Rage Against the Machine, Anushka Shankar, and others.
Huh. Marillion right off the bat. I kind of like that. I'm a bit of a prog guy myself, bands like Dream Theater and Queensryche. So, you throw something from Marillion in there and I'm kind of on board.
I will say it's the song No One Can.
Oh?
So the importance to that is, I hate to say this, I've got a rush because I'm down for doing an episode of somebody else's show now. But so it's because when me and Louise first met, it was a song that was around at that time, and I don't think Louise is much into the progressive rock scene as such, which is why I was surprised, because she had the cassette single of it, because back then we had cassette singles, and she had the cassette single of that, and it was sort of like, I was already a fan of Marillion from back in the days with Fish, and it was just a song that, because I like Marillion a lot anyway, and then Louise liked this song, it's just a song that binds us in a sense, if you know what I mean. It's got that sort of thing to it, which is why it would have to be on there, because it's an important song for that reason.
I have a song that's similar to that, and I'll keep this quick because I know you've got another podcast record coming up there. The first episode of There Can Only Be One, we covered Anthrax, one of the big four of thrash metal. And the reason why is because Anthrax, there's a certain song from Anthrax that is literally the reason why my wife and I are together. Let me tell the story here. So we were both in broadcasting college, second year, and I'm in the edit suite. And I'm trying to teach myself this new computer editing system, which was like one of the first versions of Avid. So to teach myself this, I tossed this short little Anthrax song called Cup of Joe. It's off the Volume 8 CD. It's like $1.50 at most, maybe only 40 seconds. And it's all about screaming about, I need a cup of coffee. And I just put some visuals on just to teach myself the process. And she sticks her head in the door. And she says, is that Anthrax? Like, this is a deep cut of Anthrax, like deep cut. And I turn around and I look at her and I said, and I'll apologize if for swearing here, but I'm quoting directly here. I said, you like Anthrax? Fuck, marry me. 2 years later, we were married. So that is, so that song, Cup of Joe, that is, what basically started my wife and I going out and becoming a couple, and then eventually getting married. And, that is so many years down the road. But that's the reason why we picked Anthrax to cover on that music podcast, is like, yeah, who else are we going to start with?
Absolutely. So where can people find you and get hold of you then, Jason?
I'd like to say that you can find us on Twitter, but right now I'd have to say that find us on X, I guess, the platform formerly known as Twitter. On Twitter, I'll say it anyways. Screw you, Elon. You can find us at Not That Badcast, or you can find the There Can Only Be One at Only One Cast. On other social media platforms, it's just at Not That Badcast, including Spoutable and Instagram. You can also go to our website, notthatbadcast.com, and I'm going to start blogging a lot more because this Twitter X thing is becoming a lot harder, I guess, because people are bailing now, because who knows what's going to happen with it. But that's where you're going to be able to connect with us, send us emails, find out what's coming up. And I want people to reach out. We're going to put movies out there that we want to hear what other people think about those films. It shouldn't just be two voices talking about it. Get your comments in, because as a podcaster, I'll say that makes our shows much more fun when we have listener comments.
Yep. And it's a well put together web page as well, where you've got all the links there to, wherever you want to find them. If you want to find them anywhere, all the links there on the opening page. It's got details of latest episodes, so you can go there to find the episodes that you're after of each show. And it's just, it's a really well put together website. Much better than the one that I've done, that's for sure.
That means the world, because I can't do a damn thing when it comes to web design. So this is me finding the easiest template to use off of WordPress.
Same. I'm on WordPress as well. So if you want to find me, you can find Pods Like Us on, you're listening to us, you can find us on any streaming platform. And we're also on, I'm going to say, Twitter, Instagram, and what's that new one called again?
Oh, Threads.
On Threads as well. And you can contact us through podslikeus@gmail.com. If you want to go to the website, themarvzone.org as well, to find any strangeness from me, then that'd be great. Anyway, thanks for speaking with me today, Jason.
Oh, my pleasure, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone, for listening. And hope you listen again to another episode of Pods Like Us.